Hey everyone, welcome to Rugged Outdoors Guide. My name is Pete. Glad to have you with me today. Today we are talking about something that I think our world is getting closer to making a reality, and that is just some bad stuff. If you've seen a few of my videos, you kind of know that I think that bad stuff is coming. I don't know that for sure. I'm not some sort of prophet. I'm not trying to predict anything other than maybe what the Bible says, but that's for another video. What I'm talking about today is something that is just prudent to do. And as you know, our channel is all about outdoors. And specifically, today we're talking about the outdoors that you would practice when you're at home. Stuff that you would do with the property that you own if you have a house. Even if you're in an apartment, there's some level of this that you can do on a balcony or a community area that you can use some land, for example, like a community garden. And one of the things we're talking about is something that I truly believe is coming, and most experts, I think, also do, and that is a world without cash. All right? It's coming. It's been coming for quite a long time, but it doesn't happen overnight. It takes years and really even decades. So how do I know it's coming? Well, it's just, you got just keep your eyes open. You see how few people are using cash nowadays compared to the way it used to be, and how stores, retail outlets, and everything, and online purchases are making everything more accessible to people who don't use cash. Right? We all know that's the case. But why would the powers that be want there to be no cash? Well, it's really not a hard question. One of the things is, one of the obvious ways that, or the reasons that they'll want to get rid of cash is because you can't make unauthorized payments to people without paying taxes, right? So you can't just go to, Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace, meet somebody, at a parking lot in a mall and sell them your old dehumidifier or something like that, and they give you 20 bucks cash. That can't happen in a cashless society. Every transaction is accounted for, and therefore tax can be collected, whether you like it or not. If it's a central digital currency, the government can take taxes right away, and you can do nothing about it. So taxes will be one of the reasons that is given for a cashless society. But even more insidious than that, there's a bigger reason, and that is control. Can you imagine if you are living in a country that is controlled, for example, like now by the Democrats, and they absolutely hate with a passion, you guys know, unless you've been living under a rock, someone like Donald Trump, or a MAGA Republican. Well, what if they know that you are a MAGA Republican, which they will based on the donations you make and the purchases you make? They can track that, and then what they can do is just cut you off if they wanted to. Or they can do things like, for example, say, okay, you've got this many thousands of dollars in your bank account, and this portion, $2,000, has to be spent by the end of next month, or you lose it. We take it away from you. So if we're going to take it away from you, you may as well just spend it. And of course, they'll say that's because it stimulates the economy, but they may be doing it as a punishment for you donating to Donald Trump's campaign, for example, right? And it can be with any political party. I'm just using that as an example. But you see what I'm saying? That's ultimate control. If you can control where people spend their money, how they spend it, when they spend it, and if they spend it, wow, that's control. And that's what governments have been wanting to do for years. China has that control. There are countries around the world, I think Bahamas maybe, I'm just not remembering right at the moment, but that already have gone the way of digital currency. And by the way, that doesn't mean a different type of currency, like a crypto dollar, which, that can happen, but it doesn't mean that. An American dollar can still be an American dollar. It's just not handled in cash, pieces of paper. It's all done digitally, and you don't have a choice. So that's the way I believe the world is going. And when that happens, a lot of bad things can happen when the government has that much control. There was a study recently in the last couple of years that surveyed Americans to find out how many of them have used cash for any purchases in the last week, I believe it was. And 30% of them say that they have never used cash for an extended period of time, certainly not in the last week. So that is way up from what it was 2 years previous to that. Now, to be fair, there still is a lot of cash floating around. A lot of people like to use cash, and there are some people now that are starting to even move more towards cash because they see what the government is trying to do. There is some controversy as to how many people are actually really using cash now, and where the trend is going. But the bigger sort of mega trend is undeniable, that fewer and fewer people are using cash. The controversy is in just how quickly that trend is unfolding. Is it quick, or is it just kind of more of a slow thing that just plods along every year? So I don't really know the answer to that for sure, but the future is kind of clear. And if you put any stake in what the Bible says, then we know that will happen, because the Bible says there will be a one world government, and there will be a mark that will be used to allow you to buy or sell any item in the world to anybody or buy from anybody, and without that mark, you won't be able to do anything. So if that's not something related to digital currency, I don't know what it would be, because you could still use cash, even with a mark, but no, you can't. So again, I'm just throwing the Bible in there. I happen to believe it's true, but this is not a theological video just yet. Okay, so if that's the way the world is going, if we're moving away from cash into a cashless society, if there really is a war on cash, which there really is. There's a man by the name of Jim Rickards who has written not only a book, but just tons and tons of other periodicals and videos on the cashless society. He would know. He's an insider. He knows kind of what's going on. And he says there has been an intense war on cash for decades and decades, if not longer, really. So I think we kind of know what's coming down the pipe. So I'm not here to just scare you and freak you out. I want to give you some actionable things to do in a scenario like that. Okay? One of the first things you want to do is to keep a close eye on your investments, because with inflation eating away at the value of your investments, plus things just not growing in the stock market over the last year, it's kind of a scary time. And so I have money in investments in the stock market, and I keep an eye on it, not just daily, but I happen to keep an eye on it hourly. Some people say don't do that, but that's a topic of a whole other video we'll get into maybe at some point in the distant future. I happen to like knowing what my money is doing. I don't bury my head in the sand and go somewhere off and work for $150 a day or something, when my investments are losing or making many thousands of dollars a day, and I can make adjustments to help mitigate losses and so on. But again, that's another video. So I would say keep a close eye on them, and if possible, in my opinion, I would suggest that you invest, whether it's in something safe, like a really conservative mutual fund, or whatever else you want, that you use your own skills in an online portal directly to the stock market. Don't use a broker, because you can't make decisions quickly with a broker. You're going to have to call him, and then he's going to have to get back to you when he's available or she's available, and then you're going to have to discuss everything and whatever. But you want to make decisions quickly. If you have tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars in an investment, you want to be able to sell right away, or to sell a portion of it and buy something else based on current world events and how they unfold. When there's a shortage of liquefied natural gas, for example, there are stocks you can buy that capitalize on that shortage, where companies that make liquefied natural gas, their stock is starting to skyrocket. Well, you can't just take $10,000 from your investment account and invest it and reap the benefits of that. It'll be a week later before you come to that conclusion, going back and forth with your broker and saying, is this a good idea? And they'll probably say, no, it's not a good, let's just stay the course. Don't worry about liquefied natural gas. And so you're going to have to argue. I don't like that. So I invest directly. I happen to be in Canada, and I have an account with the credit union, a local credit union, and all the credit unions in Canada use an online investing portal called Q Trade. It's not the same as Quest Trade, it's just called Q Trade. all right? And other banks like, Toronto Dominion has TD Ameritrade. Like it's their software that you can access the stock market. I'm not telling you what to do with your money. I'm just saying, in my opinion, I would do that. I would directly access my investments so that I can control them. That's number one that I would do, especially as this economy is really on shaky ground and bad times, I think, are coming. Okay, so what is the second thing that I would do? Well, this is like really the subject of a whole different video, but I'm just going to throw this out at you just to kind of whet your appetite and see if you, can maybe follow me on this and maybe check out some other videos that we'll do in the near future regarding this. And that is, prepare yourself for what I truly believe will be a reality, which is bartering. Bartering obviously just means trading for goods and services that you need with someone else who has what you need, but you have kind of some things that they need, right? It's just trading. Why would you need to do that? Well, one of the reasons is that what we just talked about, if the government is prying a little bit too deeply into your own business and they're tracking you and following you and you don't like that and you want to be a little bit separate from that, you kind of want to have a different way of transacting with someone else without having the government see every little thing that you do. There are other reasons why you might want to barter. It could just be a temporary disaster situation where you just don't have access to cash, but more likely it'll be something a little bigger than, or a lot bigger than that, like an economic collapse that may come. Again, I don't know, but it's always better to be prepared. So there are reasons that you'll want to barter, and if you do barter, I'm going to do another video on this, but I'll just I'll throw you a bone here. There are different things that you'll want to consider, and there are skills that you'll want to acquire when you're bartering. One of the things is that you'll want to make sure that you have a basic understanding of the value of what you have that you can trade with others, and what's the value of the things that you need. If you don't know, who knows? Maybe you'll give way too much for something, and so this is a little bit ambiguous here. You kind of have to figure that out yourself. You might have to talk to some people and just kind of work it out. It's also best if you are bartering with people that you know and trust, because they will probably want to help the situation rather than screw you over and get the most out of you while giving you the short end of the deal and then taking off, right? If there are people you know and trust, could be extended family, could be friends. If it's friends from your church or your social groups, they're less likely to screw you over, and they're more likely to work with you for the good of everyone. So one of the things that you don't want to do is to reveal too much of your hand, as it were. Okay, even if they're people you trust, it's probably not a great idea if somebody wants some food, for example, for you to say, oh, I've got like 200 acres of corn, and I don't even know what to do with it. It's kind of going bad. Why would you say that? Now you've just told them that you have inventory that you desperately need to get rid of. So you've just lost your advantage in that negotiation. They're going to ask you for 100 bushels for a loaf of bread that they just baked yesterday, right? You see where I'm going with that? So you can often say, if somebody needs something more, instead of saying, oh yeah, I got lots of that, you don't do that. You can say things like, well, let me check out some of my connections. I may be able to source some out for you. Give me a few days. Something like that. Again, just a general rule of negotiating that you can use for anything, even starting now, not just in a disaster. When it comes to acquiring items that you're going to use for bartering, typically it's not the best idea to stockpile or save items that are not immediately useful for people in a disaster type of situation. Like, for example, jewelry or wads of cash, all right? Those are things that are typically valuable in a different sort of normal operating society and environment and economy, not always the best for a disaster environment. In a disaster, of course, the best currency is really items or are things that people need on a daily basis just to survive, or potentially items that are maybe a vice or an addiction. And we'll deal with some of those in a second. It all makes sense, but not necessarily things that are just considered now to be more of a luxury. Now, there are some exceptions to that. There is the potential for certain precious metals to be used as bartering. And I'll just throw that out at you. There are certain things like, for example, silver wafers that are made for bartering. There are things called bartering bags that you can order online, and it's just little small silver wafers of relatively pure silver. And even though you cannot actually use that silver for anything in particular, neither can you use your $20 bill. But again, it's a medium of exchange, and the more you have, the wealthier you are. So you can use that. I'm not sure every situation is going to be different, so you need to know if that's going to be something that people will actually want to use in your bartering circles if and when that time ever comes. Okay, so the things you want to focus on when it comes to bartering power are items like food and water, of course, as well as power sources and things like alcohol even, and of course your own skills, especially skills related to the trades and medical. It's always something that people are going to need in dire situations, and if you can provide that, hey, so much the better for your scenario. And the great thing is that if you have services, it doesn't necessarily cost you anything, but you can become a valuable part of your bartering community. People will hold you in high regard, and so that just gives you extra overall influence and power, which is a good thing, as long as you don't abuse it. Be a good person and help others. Another quick tip regarding bartering is that you really don't want to keep all of your value in one place. Like if you have, a bunch of beans, for example, you don't want to have 10 sacks of beans all stacked up in your closet on top of one another. It just makes them more vulnerable. And so you want to kind of divide it up, and if you're bartering with it, have an idea of what the person that you're trading with will need in terms of quantity, and bring that quantity. Don't bring more. If you bring more, you can leave yourself open to dangerous sort of situations like theft. If you don't trust the person, you don't know the person, there's some precautions you need to take. So don't put everything in one place, and don't bring your full inventory with you when you're going to barter with somebody wherever you're meeting them. I'm going to do a separate video on bartering practices, but there really are some really kind of important and crucial things you need to be aware of. Like when you do go to barter, you probably want to bring a little bit of extra security if you're, again, dealing with somebody you've never met before. Somebody, at least a friend or two that can provide some level of security. I've seen too many movies where there's an exchange, a barter going on for a hostage or something, and both sides of the barter have, the dramatic sniper hiding in the bush in case the deal goes wrong, right? So that's kind of, you might not have to go to that extent, but maybe even, depending on your environment. The other thing to keep in mind is that geography and where you're bartering will have a lot to do with the value of whatever item that you're using to barter. So for example, water may not be as valuable in northern Minnesota, where everywhere you turn there's a lake, as it will be in the middle of Arizona, for example, right? So that holds true for just about every item, some more than others, but something to keep in mind when you are bartering. Okay, so let's get into some items that you'll want to prepare with for the purpose of bartering. All right, this is not just for survival. I did another video on that where there's some basic things you want to start to stockpile for survival, but we're talking bartering. So one of the things is food, which also happens to be one of the things you need to survive in this case. I would suggest meals, MREs, meals ready to eat, or prepared food that you can buy in big buckets. They can be expensive, but they can last for quite a while too, and they would be more convenient to trade than fresh produce. These are little ready-made little packages that can stay fresh or edible for a very long time. The other thing you'll want to do is to have a bit of scenario where you can grow some food. We have a 1 acre, I don't know, I call it a hobby farm, and we grow what we can, but we grow high value items. We don't grow things like corn, for example, which take up a lot of resources and a lot of space and have just a bit of a less return for their value. So one of the things that we grow a lot of is garlic, for example, right? Really nutrient dense, relatively small, and you can grow hundreds of heads of garlic in a relatively small square foot garden, for example. So I'm not going to get into all the items, but there are spices, herbs that you can use for a variety, not just eating, but for medicines as well. So again, that's a whole other thing, but just food in general, things that you can grow that will help sustain you and your family, things that you can preferably either freeze or dehydrate or freeze dry would be better. Canning is excellent, right? Because you might not even have power to have a freezer going, for example. So ways that you can preserve food, you might want to think about that when you're thinking of which items you are going to grow in your garden. Of course, one of the other things that you know will be valuable is medicine. I mean, there's already shortages of kids' medicine all over Canada anyway at the moment. And so you'll want to potentially stock up on some basic medicines. Just as a little by the by, you didn't hear this from me, but I happen to know that a lot of these expiry dates on medicines and other products are maybe not totally. I don't want to cause any sort of problems here. Don't take my word for this. This has just been my experience because I kind of have a little bit of insight into the industry of food and expiry dates on those, on various products. A lot of the dates are kind of bogus. They're there to sell products. In fact, I have some medicine. It's a homeopathic medicine that's non-habit forming sleep aid. And my experience tells me that after about, I think they're about 16 months after the expiry date that I have them. I got them, don't ask where. And they work. They put me to sleep. So how that's expired, I don't know. Doesn't cause a problem. They're all natural, homeopathic. So you can still stock up on medicines without completely being freaked out that they're going to expire. And that once the expiry date hits, they won't be effective anymore. That's not necessarily true. Okay, you can also focus on natural medicines, herbs that can be used for tinctures, for example, or just straight up for, like in a tea, right? So there's going to be more and more of a need for something natural once the access to store-bought pharmaceuticals deteriorates or is eliminated altogether. Okay, so medicine is a big one. Of course, I mentioned water earlier and how that really is important, obviously, but again, it'll be more or less important depending on where you are located geographically. That's something you kind of got to figure out yourself. Another product, of course, is alcohol. I'm not here to tell you to take advantage of people's addictions, but if it comes to life and death, you know, there may be some merit in people's vices in wanting to, you know, become inebriated and forget about their problems. But probably more relevant is that people will want something to, in the category of medicine, it can be used as an astringent, or a disinfectant. And it's also something that our family uses to make tinctures, which are medicine. All right? And a tincture is just basically vodka in a jar filled with some sort of herb. Usually it's really beat up and chopped up leaf of something. We're making some right now from a ginkgo leaf. All right, and you just let it sit for a month or two, and that becomes your tincture. You would take a number of drops of that every day. I also mentioned earlier about skills. It's another thing you'll want to have in your inventory of bartering. All right, and of course you want to use those for the benefit of everybody, and the more skills you have, or the more valuable the skill you have, typically in the trades, as a maintenance person, a mechanic, a carpenter, whatever it is, the more value you have in the eyes of your bartering community, which can only stand to benefit you and your family more than if you didn't have those skills. All right, so one of the other things that you'll want to have as a bartering tool, if you can, something that makes people a little bit uncomfortable, and that is guns and ammunition. And I'm talking for some pretty obvious reasons. Guns for hunting, so that you can shoot a rabbit to feed your family. And hopefully it doesn't come to this, but history tells us otherwise, for protection. Governments come after people, and that's the only way you can protect yourself. That's why we even had that in the Constitution to begin with, is so that the British couldn't just wipe out the American colonies. The Americans had guns, right? So one of the things that really bugs me is sort of a bit of a commentary here. Forgive me if I'm going off track here, but you got the young American generation, you've got the millennials and younger people that are saying, hey, we love socialism, we love communism, bring it in, it's awesome, and get rid of guns, guns kill people, that kind of thing, right? Well, obviously guns don't kill people kill people, right? Just like knives kill people, pencils can kill people. So let's not, get a little bit, carried away in terms of our rhetoric here. But do you know that every single communist dictatorship that's ever existed on the face of the planet, ever, most notably China, but all kinds of other countries, the first thing they do, one of the first, if not the first thing that they do when they take control of the country, is to make sure that all of the citizens are disarmed. Now, I know some of you watching this already know that. Some of you might not. Well, if you don't, there you have it. It's true. They get rid of the ability of the citizens to protect themselves and to oppose the government. That's the number one thing. No guns. There's no guns in China. Nobody's running around the streets shooting anybody. Ooh, great, great. Still murders. You don't need a gun to kill people. But what you've done by having no guns is you've given the government unrestrained control of the population. And that's what happens. If once America is completely de-gunned, you will see tyranny break out. And for those of you who might have a different worldview than I have, and you're leaning a little bit more towards progressive liberalism, and you hate MAGA Republicans, I'm telling you, I'm not a MAGA Republican. I don't even live in America. But I am telling you this, it is those MAGA Republicans that have guns who are holding back the tide of tyranny. If there were no MAGA Republicans, there'd be nobody with guns to stop the tide of tyranny that the government wants to unleash on the people, just like China has. You know that the government, Biden's administration, constantly, all sorts of his ministers are talking about how much China is a perfect example of things. One of them is that Fauci has said that China is a wonderful example of how they deal with COVID outbreaks. And he was referring to the fact that people were being locked into their homes, and pets that were found on the street were not brought to the SPCA. They were bludgeoned. They weren't even shot. They were bludgeoned to death. And this was witnessed by one of Joe Biden's ambassadors that was sent. And this is actually true. This is reported on a couple of different news outlets I've heard recently, where he went, I forget his name, doesn't matter. He went to China after the outbreak of COVID to see how they deal with it. He said it was horrific and brutal. And to that, Fauci said, that's what we need as an example for what we do here. Now, he never got his wish completely, but that's what he wanted. So that just goes to show you there's a lot of negativity that's going to happen when it comes to personal freedoms once everybody is de-gunned. So you want to have guns and ammunition as a barter tool if you can. And just as a little side note to that, you'll probably want to have different calibers, because even though your gun might not be a certain caliber, doesn't mean others aren't. So a variety of calibers. I mean, again, we're talking a perfect world as bartering, currency, to have a variety of calibers to fit the needs of other people with different guns. So there's my soapbox on guns. Let's move on. Another item you want to have for bartering is clothing. And of course, this is also something that you want for yourself and your family for survival. But I'm talking extra clothing that you don't need. Always a good idea. Now, depending on where you live geographically, that's going to, the requirements are going to change. Up north in the winter, obviously, you want winter clothes, very, very warm boots and hats and gloves and coats and sweaters and thermal pants, all sorts of those types of things, and you know, something very, very different if you're down in the Florida Keys. So something to keep in mind. Somebody will always need clothing. Don't know how much that's going to have a value over food, for example. Clothing doesn't deteriorate as fast as your food supplies, but again, something to have to be at least helpful for someone else, if not using it as a hard bargaining chip. Wow, I've been yammering on here so long, it's gotten dark out there. When I started this video, it was nice and bright. Ugh. Sorry guys, but this is important stuff. The next item you want to really consider as a bartering item is salt. Salt has been used, as you probably know, as a method of payment or currency for centuries. In fact, you probably heard the term, he's not worth his salt. That came from, as far as I can tell, first century Rome, during the Roman Empire, and the soldiers were all paid in salt. And if a soldier was considered not to be a particularly good soldier, maybe not as courageous or whatever, he would be said to be not worth his salt. All right, so salt is really, really a valuable item. And just as a little by the by, you know that salt is not the most commonly used spice for food and for taste in the world. It's not. You know what the number one spice is? It's pepper. But pepper is not used more for preservation. Salt is the king of that, right? So that's why salt is super valuable. And it once we don't have access to groceries and grocery stores and all of that, or if you do, and you know a box of salt costs $230, well, then you might want to consider involving yourself in a bartering community. So salt is good, but not just salt. We're talking sugar as well, for a bunch of reasons. I won't even get into it because the video is already too long. Sugar is good, and also apple cider vinegar. Apple cider vinegar is something that can be used in many cases in place of alcohol. Not so much to drink and get drunk and forget your problems. Not really, but it is a preservative, like for canning. It can be used to extract the sort of the nutrients from an herb. In other words, making a tincture, which you would use alcohol for typically. You can use apple cider vinegar, it just takes a bit longer. So, and the great thing about apple cider vinegar is you can make it yourself. Not many of us can make our own vodka, although that is possible too, but it's even easier to make your own apple cider vinegar. In fact, you can make vinegar from any fruit. You can make, use a pear. And here's how you do it. Really simple. Fill a mason jar loosely right to the top with sliced apple, and then fill the rest up with water so that it comes right to the top of the jar, and a bunch of sugar. All right, so there's recipes all over online, you can get them, but really, really easy. And the only down part is you got to wait for like a couple of months. But boy, does it make a good pungent apple cider vinegar, and we make that. By the way, just as a little by the by regarding apple cider vinegar, you can make something that is in huge demand, at least now. I found that it is. It's incredible. This stuff here, I make it, and it's called fire cider. And all it is apple cider vinegar mixed with a whole lot of products like that have been traditionally used for centuries in preventing disease and boosting the immune system. We're talking like garlic and onions and horseradish root and ginger root and turmeric root, these types of things. And this has everything in it. Great stuff, very healthy and in demand. I make this stuff just on the side, and people are asking me for it left, right, and center. Everywhere they find out who I am, they find me on Facebook, or they're just people that I know from way back in the past. Somehow they find out about me and they ask me, like, what's that stuff you make? And I've got it right here. You guys can make it too. It's called fire cider. You can find recipes online. You can check out, I've got a video, maybe it'll pop up right up there, where I make this. And you can find out how to do it. So again, it's something else that can be used as a bartering tool. All right, another thing, this is kind of important too. You got just a couple more to go and we'll be done, all right? Or you can even fast forward. You can listen to this video faster. Like you can, I think on YouTube you can make me sound like I'm talking faster. You can get through it, right? There's an idea. Toiletries. And I'm not just talking about toothpaste and toothbrushes, although that's all included, but things like hygiene products, feminine hygiene, diapers, things that can be used like a cloth or a gauze, something along with your first aid kit, for example. I would consider that all part of the toiletries scenario. And yes, the normal things like soap and shampoo and toothpaste and such, they're all really, really useful things that will absolutely be considered in a bartering situation when that stuff runs out. Those are consumables. So ultimately, you could just probably talk about all sorts of consumables that can be used for bartering. But again, stick to the things that pretty much everybody buys, not some of the really luxury items. I don't know how much you're going to need, a dog's chew toy, for example. Yeah, it's a consumable, but come on. Or cat litter. Yeah, probably won't be as big a priority in a world that has fallen apart. All right, second to last item, coffee or tea. Right, now these are items, I'm sort of contradicting what I just said, things that are sort of luxury items. Okay, there are a couple of exceptions. Coffee and tea are things that people have become so accustomed to, they're going to want to continue to consume them, and they mean a lot. Even in times, did you know that I'm a bit of a history buff, and I can't tell you how many stories I've read about soldiers in, like, for example, the Queen's Army, the British Army in the 1700s and even earlier and later, for that matter, talking about, in the trenches kind of thing, in the middle of battle, in the middle of a heated war, during their breaks, they just love their tea. They have to have their tea time. And I'm thinking, are you kidding me? There's bullets flying over your head, your life is in danger, and you're kind of going, really? Well, it's a thing. And so people love their tea and they love their coffee even more. In North America, coffee, it's all about coffee. So again, something that's relatively cheap, can last forever, and great for bartering. And the last thing is, I think I may have mentioned this, is silver and gold. And specifically, for the sake of bartering, we're talking gold wafers. You can buy those anywhere online. There's a lot of different ways or places you can buy them from. And so we're not talking about like silver coins. We're talking about these little wafers you can kind of snap off, or they're just small, relatively inexpensive, but they would be used for daily kind of exchanges. So the problem with that is that not everyone will have those, and some communities, like if you're in a bartering community, they might not see that as being of any value. So yeah, there's a bit of a risk in it, but still, it's not a horrible place to place your money, given that it's a better hedge against inflation or loss of money altogether because of some sort of cataclysmic event, whether it's politically designed or it could be a natural disaster, whatever it is, right? So gold and silver in whatever form that makes sense to barter can be a very useful item, and it can be a good place to just park your money overall. All right, guys, so I just want to make you aware of some of the downfalls, sort of the pitfalls, things to be aware of when you're stocking up on these supplies. If you really go ahead and want to stock up on a lot of these supplies that I mentioned, you're going to run into some problems, and one of the biggest, most obvious ones is cost. Right? It's just going to cost a lot of money. Do we have that money? Some of you do, I know, but some of you won't. And then you throw into that not only all these different supplies like extra clothes and extra alcohol, that can cost many, many hundreds of dollars, if not thousands of dollars, beyond what you would normally pay for your ongoing supplies in your own life currently. So not everyone has that money, but even worse, try throwing in precious metals now, gold and silver. Come on. Who can afford that? I mean, if finances aren't as big of an impediment, then you can, but not everyone's in that situation. So I am just throwing this out at you saying, I understand if you can't do it. I can't do all that. But again, these are things that you can pick and choose from, get what you can to even just start a little bit in the preparation process. And the other thing is about gold and silver. Some people want to buy them as a storage of their money and value against inflation and such. But I can tell you this, the problem with that, there are other problems, but one of the big problems is that nobody out there, even the most avid prepper, is not going to buy enough gold and silver to be an adequate storage of his or her funds, because they're probably living in a house, which is a resource that has sucked most of your money. And then you probably have some investments, maybe in the stock market or mutual funds, whatever. By the way, it's all in the stock market, in case you didn't know. Pretty much everything is in the stock market. All of your mutual funds are just a mixture of stocks that are on the market. Only a few investments, like independent real estate investments and personal loans or something, is not on the market. It's a different investment. But a lot of things that you might not think of that are related to the stock market, they are. So most of us have some sort of investment, I think, even if it's just a little bit, it's connected to the stock market. It's not in precious metals, and it probably will stay in the stock market until, what hits the fan. And all of a sudden you're like, oh man, I gotta get my money out of there. By then, your money probably isn't going to be worth a whole lot. So you'll never have enough gold and silver that will reflect the value of your life right now, like your house and your investments. So again, gold and silver can just be a nice little side thing that you can have for maybe bartering, I'm thinking. Anyway, guys, I can talk more and more about it. I will have other videos that are related to specifics like bartering techniques, things to brush up, skills to brush up on, so that you can be a effective bartering party. And guys, if you appreciate videos like this and help you prepare to whatever extent you want to prepare for bad things to come, please do give me a like and a subscribe. I will continue to make videos like this, and I hope that you are well, and I hope that you can prepare with your family to have some level of preparedness in a world where there's just more question marks now than ever before. All right, guys, thank you for watching, and may God richly bless you. Really, guys, I do wish that for you, and I pray, generically, I pray for all of you, whether you want me to or not. I will. All right, guys, and I hope to see you very soon. Take care.